Welcome to Washington Talk. I'm In-jung Cho. Secretary Blinken visited Korea and reaffirmed that the U.S. stands with its ally as it goes through political turmoil. North Korea claims to have successfully tested a new intermediate-range hypersonic ballistic missile. Today we discuss how the U.S. views these latest developments on the Korean peninsula.
The United States has full confidence in South Korea's institutions, and we reaffirm our unwavering support for the Korean people.
우리는 오늘 한미동맹에 어떠한 공백도 없음을 재확인하였습니다.
In the studio with me, Ambassador James Jeffrey, chair of the Middle East program at the Wilson Center. Ambassador Jeffrey was the special representative for Syria engagement and the special envoy for the global coalition to defeat ISIS. Ambassador Jeffrey also served as the deputy national security advisor during the George W. Bush administration. He was also the U.S. ambassador to Iraq, Turkey, and to Albania. Also joining us, Dr. Patrick Cronin, Asia-Pacific Security Chair at the Hudson Institute. Dr. Cronin previously served as a Senior Director of the Institute for National Strategic Studies at the National Defense University. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, Dr. Cronin, Secretary of State Tony Blinken visited Seoul to show the alliance remains strong for the Biden administration, which promoted U.S.-South Korea-Japan cooperation as an important part to contain China. How important was this trip as South Korea goes through the political turmoil?
Well, even though power is now focused on the incoming Trump administration here in the United States, this is the final 2 weeks of the Biden administration's chance to underscore their achievements. And I think Secretary Blinken first wanted to underscore that the South Korean-U.S. relationship has made tremendous progress, both bilaterally and multilaterally with other allies like Japan. And he wanted to make sure that that carries on to the Trump administration. He wanted to reinforce that achievement of the Biden administration. But also he wanted to signal to North Korea, to China, to Russia, that our relationship with South Korea is extremely important. And there should be no outside interference or meddling while they go through some political tumult.
Mm-hmm. And Ambassador Jeffrey, Secretary Blinken said the U.S. had serious concerns about some of the actions taken by President Yoon. But he also noted that South Korea has been an extraordinary partner for the U.S. for many decades, especially the last 4 years. The U.S. has refrained from condemning President Yoon directly so far. Do you think Washington has mixed feelings about the possible arrest and impeachment of President Yoon, who's a staunch partner of the United States?
Well, first, thanks for having me on. I think that Washington, first and foremost, wants to see stability in the government of South Korea. This is not a stable period, but that's okay. Democracies, including American democracy, go through such periods, and Tony Blinken is aware of that. So it's somewhat of a reassuring message. Yes, we didn't like some of the things that President Yoon did. But on the other hand, you've got a process underway. We trust you. Stay calm. We're with you. Don't get nervous about us, and we won't get nervous about you. It's a good message. I think it was an effective visit.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Cronin, 1 month into the short-lived martial law declaration and presidential impeachment, there's a turnaround in public opinion in South Korea. There are reports of rising approval ratings for President Yoon and the ruling party. And the Gallup poll that was just recently out said that 11% of the people who were for impeachment are now against impeachment. The U.S. highly regarded the voices and actions of the Korean people since the martial law. Do you think the U.S. will respect and listen to the voices against the impeachment, which have been gaining momentum recently?
Well, I hope so. The United States clearly needs to listen to all the voices in our Korean ally. But at the same time, we're watching the process unfold in Korean democracy. This is for the Koreans to decide. And they took that vote. I was outside the National Assembly when they voted to impeach, and they would not have had the two-thirds majority they needed to impeach President Yoon without the support of some members of the ruling party. So you can't take back the impeachment vote. You voted for it. Let it go through the process now. Let it go to the courts and let it decide, let the Constitutional Court decide, is the impeachment valid or not? And I think that's what the United States wants to see, see the constitutional process work through its steps and do so peacefully. And we're ready to work with whatever government emerges.
And Ambassador Jeffrey, the main opposition Democratic Party told the Constitutional Court that it would remove the insurrection charges from grounds for impeaching President Yoon so that the judges can move more quickly. The ruling party said the change means that the impeachment should be dropped immediately. Now, there are concerns about the legality of the declaration of the martial law and the subsequent legal steps of applying the insurrection charges and the investigation process. Do you really think that democracy and the rule of law has played out in South Korea as the United States publicly claims?
I do. I do, first of all, because I've lived in many countries that are democracies. They are, like the United States, flawed democracies. And from time to time, you have things like impeachments or putting presidents on trial. In fact, we see it right here in the United States. So the general feeling in America is, as long as there is the core pillars of the relationship between us remain, and as long as our ally is stable, how it works through these things is not really a primary concern of ours. That is the position Dr. Cronin just represented. It's a position that I'm used to doing. I'm not sure that President Trump, however, when he comes into office, will adhere to those main lines of American traditional foreign policy. So that's something we have to watch.
I wonder how President Trump will be different, as you just noted, because those people who are against impeachment, now their demonstrations have the American flag, Stop the Steal slogan, and also the MAGA-like red hats, clearly appealing to President Trump for help. How do you think President Trump will be different?
Well, first of all, we can trust President Trump to engage in strong rhetoric and unconsidered outbursts if he doesn't like one of the other leaders in Korea or something that a Korean leader of a political party does. What I would urge everyone to do, however, is to realize normally presidents don't say things unless they're absolutely committed to carrying it out in actions and policies. President Trump is quite different. Judge the Trump administration by what is actually done, not what is said or what is threatened.
So Steve Bannon, former White House strategist, did a podcast this week on South Korea's political turmoil. And he said, brothers and sisters in Korea, we got your back. Do you think Steve Bannon has President Trump's ears?
Steve Bannon may have the Korean people's back, but President Trump doesn't have Steve Bannon's back. One of the problems with the Trump team is many people think they can speak for President Trump. Only one person speaks for President Trump, that's President Trump himself, and often what he's speaking isn't really what President Trump is thinking. So good luck, everybody.
So there's the similarities that those against impeachment, they also talk about election being rigged in South Korea, which is similar to the Trump supporters. Do you think that would resonate with President Trump and his supporters?
It might resonate with President Trump himself because he has an obsession with the 2020 election. But the people around him do not. Those candidates who ran on a strong, the election was stolen basis in Arizona and elsewhere in 2020 and 2022 did not do well. And so the Republican Party and even the Trump base, that is the politically active and influential base, really want to move beyond this. So they are not going to be too influenced by claims of a flawed election in Korea or Ukraine or Georgia or any place else. They're going to focus on American interests and what our policies are towards Korea, towards North Korea, South Korea, China, and whether the events in Korea serve those or endanger those. As a former member of the Trump policy team, I can assure you that individual actions of members of that team or people who claim to be members of that team may or may not actually represent the team as a whole of President Trump. One of the problems or charms of President Trump is he lets 1,000 flowers bloom. It is not a disciplined gang, particularly now before they've come into government. But even after, you will be hearing conflicting statements and conflicting actions from many people in the Trump camp. At the end of the day, it is what the government as a whole does that is important, and I am confident they will not do anything that will endanger our Korean friends.
And Dr. Cronin, I heard from many people in Washington that there are delegations from both sides, from the opposition and the ruling party, coming to Washington, going to Mar-a-Lago to meet with people, the government officials and the incoming Trump administration. Do you think those actions would appeal to President Trump? What impact could they make?
Well, I think they may be disappointed. I mean, they clearly want to have the ear of the new president, but so do the Chinese, so do a lot of other countries coming to town for the inauguration. But I do worry that President Trump may be inclined to have an outburst suddenly, thinking that's the right thing to say, and it may sort of look overly intrusive into the domestic politics of South Korea, and he may not have considered the impact of that. He needs to stay above the fray. It's one thing, look at what's happening in Europe with Elon Musk sort of taking on in the UK politics, for instance, in Britain. The blowback is very negative toward the United States, but it wasn't President Trump who said it, right? So it's one thing for Elon Musk to say it, or Steve Bannon even to say it, even less so than Elon Musk, less important to the Trump circle right now. Very important for the president to stay above the domestic politics of our ally and to stay focused on our strategic interests. And I think, he has a lot of strategic challenges from day one. He doesn't really need to start meddling. Where that may change will be if there's a crisis, right? So if the opposition, if this corruption investigation office actually tries to arrest, even use of force to arrest, the suspended president, I think then it may be fair game for the president to at least say something about, hey, you're not following your own constitution, you're overstepping. But it's still dangerous ground for the president to get involved in the domestic politics of an ally.
Do you agree that a forceful arrest of President Yoon may ring alarm bells to Washington?
I do very much, and let me reinforce what my colleague has said. Under any circumstances, it will ring alarm bells. But the other thing is, there's a seriousness core to President Trump and the people around him, and I experienced this in the last administration, and right now, Prime Minister Netanyahu is experiencing it in Israel. That is, Trump doesn't want to have serious problems on his watch. He expects everybody to behave and not create problems that he has to really deal with, as opposed to a soundbite or a WhatsApp comment. So therefore, if there is something dramatic that happens, then not only will President Trump speak out, but he could take some actions that may or may not be wise, but it is a warning, do not shake the boat. I don't want a lot of trouble from you, Korea, from you, Ukraine, from you, Germany, from you, Israel, from you, Panama. And that's a pretty good message to take.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador Jeffrey, Congresswoman Young Kim with the Republican Party published an op-ed saying the U.S. must pay attention. Factions that led the presidential impeachment in Korea have been working to undermine the alliance and the U.S.-ROK-Japan trilateral cooperation. What is your reaction to the fact that now a U.S. politician has begun to proactively voice her opinion on the sensitive political situation in South Korea? And what is your reaction to the fact that at the beginning of the political turmoil, media coverage focused on the anti-Yoon protests, but now other voices are coming out as well?
Well, that's the charm and beauty of America. We have a diversity of opinion. We have free speech. She is a member of Congress. There are 534 other members of Congress. Many of them have spoken out with different views. All I can say is it is better if you are Korea or another country that the U.S. Congress is interested in than if you are in a country that nobody cares about, because this underlines the importance that the United States places ever since 1950 on Korea as a partner and ally. We are concerned. We want to see everything work out well. Different members of Congress have different views about what that should look like, but the underlying element that unifies everyone in Congress and everyone here in Washington is, please, Korea, we need you. You need us. Let's work this out in a rational, calm manner.
And Dr. Cronin, the Chinese embassy in South Korea posted a notice on its WeChat account saying that according to the Immigration Control Act of South Korea, foreign nationals in South Korea may not engage in political activities except as provided by law. The embassy also told the Chinese people to avoid making public political statements and to keep away from political rallies. Now, the ruling party lawmakers are releasing photos of Chinese nationals participating in the anti-Yoon protest. Do you agree with concerns that possible Chinese influence over the anti-Yoon protest, over the society, and over the body politics of Korea?
Yes, the influence campaign from China has not just permeated South Korea, but the United States and most of our allies and partners around the world. The question is, what do we do about it? And the answer is not martial law. The answer is to work through a set of policy prescriptions that can stand up to that kind of influence campaign. At the same time, Xi Jinping understands even more than maybe President Trump. I agree with everything Ambassador Jeffrey said about not wanting to instigate a crisis on your sort of doorstep for China. So Xi Jinping is trying to suppress any further instigation of incidents. He wants to start with a clean slate with whatever government he's dealing with in South Korea, and he senses an opportunity for China to grow its influence now on the Korean Peninsula, where it's been set back for the last 5-8 years, ever since the THAAD incident, for instance, in 2016, 2017, where they stopped the missile defense battery or they protested and put economic pressure on South Korea. But in terms of President Yoon called attention to the fact that there was Chinese influence. It talked about the drones being operating, looking at the American carrier in Busan. That is a security threat. There's no doubt. So we have a security cooperation. We have an alliance. We need to work on those kind of threats together. But it doesn't mean you should suspend your democratic processes to deal with that. We can do it through the democratic processes of the United States, and I think South Korea can do it through the democratic processes in its constitution as well.
But Dr. Cronin, wouldn't China want to engage in influence activities with the anti-Yoon group, as the leader of the main opposition party is criticized by the ruling party of having pro-China policies?
Right, and it's not just the leader. The Democratic Party of Korea in general wants to go back to what they would call a more equidistant policy of dealing with the great powers, of dealing with and kind of mediating between China and the United States. Which China would like to see that kind of equidistance away from the U.S. alliance. So that is a concern. The Chinese are not going to give up that interest. That's exactly what they're going to be trying to do. And so we shouldn't take their statement from their embassy as saying, don't get involved and don't meddle, as the last word on what they're actually doing on the ground. We'd be naive to think that they're not interested in growing their influence. But Xi Jinping is basically saying, don't get caught doing these things, because otherwise we're going to look like the bad guy. We want the Americans right now to look like they're on their way out and we're on our way up.
Ambassador Jeffrey, do you also think that it is a good opportunity for China to engage in influence activities in Korea, to influence the elections there? We hear many things about Russia getting involved to influence American elections.
I think China might. I'm not an expert on China. What I have learned is that China is serious and careful in a way that President Putin, for example, you just cited, Russia is not. They rush into anything, cut undersea cables, try to influence elections. The Chinese will look at what will be the second and third effects of this. By our interfering, will we support those factions in Korea that are more opposed to a Chinese role in the future of Korea, or those who are supportive of us? I think one interpretation of the Chinese embassy statement was, look, we're really not trying to have a role, we're being the innocent bystander. Now, as Dr. Cronin said, that's not actually the case, but they're being quite careful.
And Dr. Cronin, if the Constitutional Court reinstates President Yoon, would he be able to make a comeback in diplomacy and actively pursue cooperation with the United States as he did before impeachment and before the martial law declaration? Or would he have lost his leverage?
Well, he'll have diminished leverage. But yes, of course, he'll have to try to come back. And the United States will continue to have the same interests we had before. So we'll be able to at least start from the fact that we share common interests. And that's what was driving the Yoon's cooperation with the Biden administration. There were common interests that we had for helping South Korea and South Korea helping the United States. I think we can continue to work on that basis. But I think what is lost here mostly is his domestic support. That even if you mentioned earlier the polls may be shifting back, well, those are the polls shifting back about this impeachment fight that's going on because the Democratic Party looks like they're overstepping the Constitution. But I think if he's removed from suspension, he will still be seen as a lame duck president domestically. And I think that will hurt him in terms of the ability. He also finally will not have regained control over the National Assembly, which is what sort of prompted this major crisis this past year anyhow.
And I want to move to the security situation on the Korean Peninsula. Dr. Cronin, North Korea claims that Kim Jong-un oversaw a successful test of a new intermediate-range hypersonic ballistic missile that can hit Guam. This comes just days before President Trump's inauguration. Is North Korea trying to gain leverage over the incoming Trump administration? And how would North Korea's provocations have any impact on President Trump's willingness to speak to Kim Jong-un if needed?
I think Kim Jong-un is trying to get the attention of President Trump, but it's more than that as well. He is exploiting a domestic crisis in South Korea. He's also trying to brandish the fact that his relationship with Russia is leading to greater capabilities, even while he's keeping ambiguous exactly what they are getting from Russia. And by the way, Russia this week denied that they were giving him the technology for these missiles, but I wouldn't take that as the last word from Moscow either. Secondly, I think that the missile launch was very much timed to get the president's attention that, look, you don't want instability in this region. You have larger fish to fry in terms of you want to deal with China. You want to deal with sort of rebuilding American economic strength. Make a deal, engage me again, and come back on terms that would be acceptable. But by the way, those terms are going to be sort of a higher price this time because I've got more capabilities. And look at my capabilities. I now have intermediate range ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles that could evade your defenses and hit your key defensive targets even in the Pacific, not all the way in the homeland. So it's not just a deal on ICBMs, it's a deal that has to deal with even the intermediate range level missiles. So yeah, they're getting ready to bargain.
Ambassador Jeffrey, President Trump is skeptical of alliances and expected to ask allies to shoulder more burden sharing. However, after winning the election, President Trump, in phone conversation with President Yoon Suk-yeol, showed interest in cooperation with Korea in shipbuilding. Now, do you think such cooperation could soften President Trump's demand for South Korea to shoulder more defense burden?
Absolutely. And our experience with President Trump in the first administration is he puts non-negotiable, extreme demands on the table as a starting point. And then he sees how people respond. If they respond positively, for example, shared shipbuilding, which is a huge problem for the U.S. Navy in trying to compete with China. President Trump put his finger on something very important. And as you know, South Korea is one of the leaders in the world in ship manufacturing. This is a great idea, and it would be helpful. It's exactly the kind of thing the Trump administration, I believe, will look for.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Cronin, the Biden administration will send Ambassador Joseph Yoon as an interim ambassador to South Korea. Usually, Chargé d'Affaires does the role of acting ambassador. So what's behind this sending Ambassador Joseph Yoon to Korea at this moment? And would that be helpful in alliance management?
Well, I think it can't hurt. It does signal Washington's interest in the fact that this relationship is so important. We want somebody who's been trusted and has worked with the Trump administration, somebody who's worked with the Biden administration, somebody who is a real professional and at the ambassador level, because you can't get anybody confirmed at this point, who can go in there and make sure that we are in touch every day, every moment with anybody on the both sides of the aisle in Korea, because this account is just too strategically significant. I think this does help. Ambassador Yoon is a great professional, and he brings, I think, trust from both sides in Korea and in Washington as well.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Dr. Cronin, Ambassador Jeffrey, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for watching. We'll be back here next week with U.S. experts to discuss the two Koreas and the region right here from Washington.